Hello and welcome back to Continental Club, where we discuss the hottest topics in European football. Joining me as ever, it's Pat and Chris, and today we're talking rebuilds because Alex Nelson has asked, how can Lyon bounce back after losing Fekir, Mendy and Ndombele? But before we get into Lyon, remember to subscribe to Euro Football Daily and hit that notification bell to never miss a video. But Chris, a lot of outgoings at Lyon this summer.
Yeah, we have to temper the term rebuild here, don't we? With the fact that the transfer window on the continent doesn't end for quite some time. So this could change and we could all have egg on our face by the time, this episode goes live. But Lyon have lost, some pretty outstanding talent, haven't they? In the form of Ndombele, Lyon Mendy to Real Madrid, and of course Nabil Fekir to Real Betis for a snippet at 17.7 million. Now, it's hard to see how they improve on last season's finish of third. I think they only finished third by 2 points, without replacing that talent. And they've been a little bit slow to do so. They've made a couple of good signings. Thiago Mendes, of course, hasn't been in Europe for all that long. A couple of very decent seasons with Lille, coming from Brazil. They've signed him for about £20 million, right?
I think that's about it.
And he's very much the Ndombele replacement, although not as forward-thinking as Ndombele. His defensive numbers, which we'll get into in a minute, are very good. A very competent passer, and they've actually signed a left-back from the domestic league. Again, we'll touch upon him in a second. Nabil Fekir, of course, tried to sell him last season for £60 million. Only had a year left on his contract and only has one knee, hence the 17.7 million. So you do feel for them on that front. They tried to offload him for a very decent price, a price which would have enabled them to rebuild in a much more significant fashion, right? But I mean, their loss might be Real Betis' gain at this point, but one of the weirder transfers of the window, I think we'll all agree. What I want to ask you guys, for 17.7 million, I mean, do you think any other clubs should have taken a risk on him? Would Arsenal have been a good destination for him for that price, or if that had come at the sacrifice of another transfer, are you happy that they just avoided it?
Yeah, I think it's fine. He's a good player. A club like Everton, I think, could have potentially taken a risk on that because they gave a lot of minutes to Bernard last season, who I don't think is very good at all. And it felt like the kind of thing where, if he arrives and his fitness is okay, then you actually get a really, really, really good player. And if his fitness is bad, you've barely spent anything on it. So I think that level of club, I think, would have been quite a smart one to take a risk.
I mean, is that more of a risk than Wilfried Zaha at £70 million?
Yeah, I think, Zaha equally a bit of a risk as well at that price, definitely. But I just think whenever you fail in medical, you're unlikely to get another top move. I mean, look at someone like Tyrone Mings. He's had 2 serious knee injuries in the last 3 years, and he gets through a medical at Aston Villa. Like, to fail a medical, there must be something going on behind the scenes that we don't quite know. So I think it was always unlikely.
That was a year ago, though. I mean, that was a year ago. That was
but Fekir only missed something like 10 games in the last 2 years, but he's still, not being.
Yeah, but this is the thing. He failed the medical last year, but then he had 2,000 minutes this season, and supposedly they do have to manage his fitness. But at the same time, I think he's got over 2,000 minutes in pretty much all the last 3 seasons. So
this is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so you do.
There must be something underlying.
Yeah, but then I kind of feel like that's exactly what I'm saying. I think if Fekir came to your club and he played, 22 games in the league, and Zaha came to your club and played 38 games in the league, I'm pretty certain Fekir would be involved in more goals than Zaha.
Country?
I don't think that's a really very controversial thing to say. Zaha's never really been a big end product guy. He's a dribbler. So I think, I don't know, it does feel like he could have aimed a little bit higher, but Betis is a fun place to go.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, last season, Fekir not reaching the heady heights of previous seasons. I think the first year he's put in under 30 league appearances, but fitness generally, I don't think as bad as it's perceived. And Liverpool were willing to take him, weren't they? But for a cut price fee, which of course Aulas, the Lyon president, wasn't a huge fan of, was he, at the 11th hour? 9 goals and 7 assists for Fekir last season, still averaging 3.1 shots per game, 1.8 key passes. So extremely good in that sense. Lyon Mendy will be a massive, massive miss. And we like him because his dribble numbers are good. And of course, if you're going to be the long-term heir to Marcelo at Real Madrid, your dribble numbers better be pretty bloody good. But didn't really give much up on the defensive end either. 2.6 tackles and interceptions per game. And to replace him, they've gone for a little bit of a different flavour in Lille's Youssef Kone. Now, from what I've researched on him, and that is very light, extremely good defensive numbers, around 5.5 tackles and interceptions, but not the same player, the same profile as Ferland Mendy going forward. Now, do you guys know anything about him? Because I'm far from an authority on Lille's, exports.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. He looks like a good defender, and I think he's 23 years old. Like, it's a good price. And the thing is, at the beginning of this, you said you weren't sure how they would improve on third in the league. And I see what you're saying. If you mean like how do they improve as a team, but I think one of the ways they do it is by making Lille, who finished above them, worse. Right. So taking Thiago Mendes, who was Lille's most important midfielder, taking Youssef Kone, who was a guaranteed starter in that left-hand slot. I think that those will really help them push on. Like, on the plus side, it does just make them a little bit more solid at the back. And like Mendes is a very good defender, but he's not as mobile as Ndombele. So perhaps they're trying to just recalibrate a little bit there. And it'll be interesting to see what Silvinho wants from that team.
He's got a big ask. I mean, I was looking at their squad this morning. They've only got 18 players on their books at the moment out of a possible 25. And it's obviously his first job in management. He's under Junior Pernambucano, who's the new director of football there. It's sort of all change at Lyon. But they've still got some fantastic attacking options as well.
Yeah.
Although Moussa Dembele is interesting some clubs.
But letting Fekir go so that you could say give more minutes to like Maxwell Cornet, I think is actually a perfectly sensible thing to do. Like Traore didn't play all that much last season at certain stages. Dembele wasn't a nailed-on starter for much of the campaign despite having outrageous numbers. Cornet exactly the same boat. So you imagine between those guys plus Houssem Aouar, you imagine that you've got enough attacking output there, you'd have thought. Though it would be nice if at least one of their fullbacks could do something in attack, but it's not going to be Dubois, is it?
Aouar putting up really good numbers from the left-hand side last year. And of course, the Moussa Dembele rumours to Manchester United rage on, which they'll be hoping to extinguish fairly soon because he does look like he's ready to lead that line. Like Pato said, his expected goals and assists, I think, hovering around sort of like 0.8, 0.9.
Something I've seen.
Last campaign, he was really clinical when he got on the pitch. And Thiago Mendes can play a multitude of positions, can't he? So maybe that was part of their thinking, like not necessarily an Ndombele replacement, but here is a guy who is flexible, and if we've got, only 18 players on the books, that is of course worth its weight in gold. Joachim Andersen, now we were talking about him on Transfer Review a few weeks ago. Do we think he's going to add anything significant to the Lyon backline? Because defence is clearly one of their focal points. You weren't overly enamoured when he was linked with Arsenal, so bit of a bullet dodge there, or what?
Not necessarily. I mean, he was linked with Arsenal for a lot more money. I think it was going to be closer to 30, and I think if you're going to spend 30 million on a centre back in your Arsenal, you can probably do a bit better than Joachim Andersen. I think he's a good young centre back, like with a lot of development to do. But I think that will be less of a problem at Lyon than it is at Arsenal. Arsenal were hoping for a guy who would come in and like fix a really shaky defence. Lyon don't have like a stellar defence, but they will have protection in front of them. And there's a big difference between being ready to contribute to Lyon in Ligue 1 and being ready to really run the centre-back position for Arsenal in the Premier League. I think that actually he'll develop into a very good centre-back. At the moment, there's a little bit of sloppiness in his game. He's quite a front-foot defender, and that means that while you get good tackle and interception numbers out of him often, it means that he can get turned too. His passing's really, really good.
Yeah,
that's the exciting thing. So his distribution is going to help them out a bit at the back, and perhaps they hope that will replace some of the ball progression that they used to get from Mendy and Ndombele. But I don't know. I like Andersen. I think that they've paid a more reasonable fee than Arsenal were going to. And
it was around £21 million in the end.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. And Sampdoria generally have good defenders. So I think that it's a perfectly worthwhile gamble for them.
Yeah, fair enough. Play alongside Marcelo as well, who had a really underrated campaign at centre back last year as well, and they got Jason Denier, so they're quite well stocked at centre back.
The only feeling is that maybe they will still do some business, but it does actually feel like they could. I think Thiago Mendes is a good signing, but I do feel like they could have maybe aimed a little bit higher. Like everybody says, oh God, it will be so hard to replace Ndombele, and it will be hard to replace Ndombele. But you also think, okay, well, there's someone like Songare at Toulouse who they could have taken. Like that would have been perfectly good for them. Like there is a lot of talent around Ligue 1 that you can afford to take risks on, and I think that maybe especially with some of those clubs in financial difficulty. So I think that maybe they could go and get another central midfielder just to beef up those options.
There's still exciting balance in that squad. I mean, that concludes my notes. But Toussaint still puts a very good defensive numbers. It doesn't need very good passer. Our, like we've just mentioned, very good attacking out.
But that makes you feel a little bit like Thiago Mendes and Toussaint, like they're a very similar pairing of players. And I don't necessarily want both of those guys in my side unless their idea is, okay, this will free Aouar up to, do whatever he wants, which I guess is okay.
Yeah, I feel like they've either been brought in, not as placeholders, that's probably doing them a bit of a disservice, maybe as enablers to see some of that young talent grow. But also, like you said, I think anything really to get the fans that excited there. It's sensible business.
Yeah.
But again, they may add to the window. There's some other teams who would certainly, we should bring into them under the microscope a little bit more than Lyon.
I mean, 100%. I mean, we were taking a journey from Ligue 1. I mean, we've got to talk about Atletico Madrid because the amount of turnover they've gone through this summer is, frightening, really. They've obviously lost Godin, Juanfran, Felipe Luis, Rodri, Griezmann, just basically the spine of their side last year. And, Juanfran, Felipe Luis, Godin all needed to be moved on, particularly Juanfran and Felipe Luis, but I think they could have got another year or two out of Godin, but he just refused to sign that contract. They've done made over 1,000 appearances between them for Atleti, and they've replaced them with, I think, quite mediocre players, to be honest, except for Mario Hermoso, who I think is quite an exciting move.
Yeah.
But Felipe, 30-year-old centre-back from Porto, only played 3 years in Europe. Before that was sort of, bottling around the Brazilian league. Renan Lodi, pretty much an unknown player from Brazil. And then Kieran Trippier, whilst I think it's a great move for him, he's coming off his worst season of his career. And replacing Juanfran, who's a really underrated player. I've always thought Juanfran is particularly underrated. It's going to be really difficult. And they've obviously got big shoes to fill. I mean, Simeone's side have conceded, I think, 25 league goals per season for the last 6 years on average, which is a lot less than Barcelona and a hell of a lot less than Real Madrid. So it's a big ask. And then Marcus Llorente coming in.
I like
to
that
replace
move.
Rodri.
I think they paid a lot
seen enough
for
of
him.
To be fair, I think he's a
around
bit
45
overpriced.
million euros.
They paid far too much for him, but they're getting him off arrival. I mean, and to be fair, they had so much money coming in. They got 30 mil for Gelson Martins out to Monaco. That's unbelievable. There's so much cash coming into that club that I wouldn't have gone and spent so much of it on João Felix. Though, I mean, look, João Felix looks like a very good young attacker. He's an extremely active defensive presence. You understand why they think, okay, right, this might be the guy. But maybe he's the guy for 60 mil, not the guy for 120. So I think maybe they could have afforded to hedge a little bit there and go for 2 or 3 guys rather than just the one.
I just don't know whether Marcus Llorente is ready to step in. Well, he probably will be fine for Atletico Madrid, but I don't know whether he's Rodri level. I think Rodri's probably the best emerging defensive midfielder in the world. And Marcus Llorente's played 24 La Liga games in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, but when they bought Rodri, he'd only had He'd only had one proper season. Yeah, I mean, we say that now, but at the time they bought him, in fact, the first few weeks of the season, people were on the fence about him because he hadn't played that much.
Llorente has a better pedigree than Rodri did when he was bought in from Villarreal.
I'm not quite so sure of that.
And they've turned over a hell of a profit on Rodri as well. That is part of Atletico Madrid's business model, isn't it? It's great to see them rival Real Madrid and Barcelona at the top of the table, but there's an element, I suppose, of realism, more so than the other two clubs, with how long they can hold on to their talent and when is a good deal, too good to turn down. I mean, spending 120 on João Felix is a little bit of a game changer, isn't it? That's a massive signal of intent, but it's also, just a huge risk. That could really impact the club, in the short to medium term as to whether, he hits the ground running or not.
I still think they're seriously short of goals as well. Unless Morata has a fantastic year, Diego Costa looks pretty much done. João Felix needs to hit the ground running. And then they are looking to bring in a creative midfielder. I think they consistently link with Christian Eriksen and James Rodriguez as well, because his move to Napoli seems to be stalling by the day. So it'll be a fascinating year for Atleti. But lots of my friends outside of Football Daily are like, they're going to be right up there with Barcelona and Real Madrid. I think they could actually be fighting out for third with Sevilla and Valencia rather, but we'll see.
The only advantage they have over those sort of teams, Marcelino at Valencia, I suppose he's a consistent presence there now, although, rumour has it Peter Lim, the relationships did become strained at the end of last campaign, is that his system and the sort of the backing that Diego Simeone gets, just that consistency is pretty unrivaled at the top of La Liga, isn't it? So I think they will qualify for Champions League football almost on that basis alone, because other clubs pretty tumultuous through, look at last season, Sevilla. competing for Champions League football until halfway through the season, and they part away as Pablo Machín. That's what they have. That's a huge positive.
And I also don't mean to demean some of their talent they've still got. I mean, Oblak, Jose Jimenez, Koke, Sal Niguez, these are seriously good performers.
But they were bad last season. And they were bad last season.
Oblak, I don't think necessarily.
No, I mean like the team was bad last season. Like we could talk about teams like Arsenal being bad last season, but Atleti were genuinely really bad last season. They were not good at all. And you find it hard to look at them and say that they've got better squad-wise. So it's very difficult to see how they fix it. As good as Simeone is, I think that over the last couple of seasons, he's been doing a slightly worse job, and that might be because of losing particular key parts, but it's also because he's been quite stubborn about replacing those parts. Like Felipe Luis and Juan Fran. So unless it just feels like they could have gone out and just said, we're going to get like a lights out right back, left back, and a goal scoring winger. We're just going to go and spend our money on those things. And that would have been like really, really sensible and set them up well for years to come. And instead it feels a little bit like it feels like it's kind of half one thing, half another, their transfer window.
Thinking of another club that have, lost some big stars this window, Pat, Ajax, I mean, it's going to be obviously difficult to replicate what they did last year, but De Jong, De Ligt, I mean, what do you think of Ajax coming up next season?
Well, I mean, yeah, it is going to be difficult for them. But on the other hand, it's the Eredivisie. I mean, nobody expects them to do what they did in the Champions League again. And their defence, I mean, I still think they've got an excellent coach. They've managed to keep hold of some of their defenders too. Obviously in the Nicolas Tagliafico looked like he was going to leave at one stage. Daley Blind was excellent last season, was never present. I think that he'll be good. And they've brought in a bunch of defenders. They brought in Magayan back in January. They've brought in a couple this summer already. Plus their, Kikpiri from the Eredivisie as well. And then they're going to probably promote Per Schuurs, who you might have seen a compilation.
There's an amazing clip going around on Twitter. He looks fantastic. I'm always a bit loath to judge someone off a 2-minute clip on Twitter, but he looks awesome.
Well, at least as a passer, he will be. And also
have a production line, don't they? A big blonde centre back.
Yeah, though he's actually kind of the same age as De Ligt, and you realise how young De Ligt is. That you think. I was looking at him and I was like, oh, well, I suppose, he's the same age as De Ligt. And then I thought, yeah, but that's 19. As a centre-back, they're still really young. But they've always got these guys coming through, like Ryan Gravenberch. You'd expect him to get more minutes this season. He didn't. I think he got his first appearance last year, becoming the youngest Ajax player ever to play in the Eredivisie. So they always do have talent coming through. Plus, they've gone and got some other players. I think didn't they bring in Quincy Promes
from Sevilla? Yeah.
So he will probably be pretty good for them. And I don't know, it'll be what it always is. It'll be a two-way fight for the title with them and PSV.
And PSV have lost Luke de Jong as well, who's been their top goal scorer for quite a while. Lozano's consistently linked with Napoli as well.
Yeah, though now it looks like Napoli are looking at Pepe as well as James Rodriguez. Plus PSV have gone and got Bruma off RB Leipzig. So I think actually those guys will probably tear it up in the Eredivisie next season. I would expect Ajax to take a step back, kind of continentally speaking, but in the Eredivisie they'll be absolutely competing for the title again, and I don't think it will really affect them that much.
Yeah, they've got this big guy coming in called Razvan Marin coming in from Standard Liège as well, who's a Romanian.
For quite a lot of money
for
them,
a lot of money.
Like 11, 12 mil.
He's highly talked about, but I'm not even going to lie to you, never seen him play, hadn't heard of him before this morning. So I'm not even going to try and pretend. But yeah, it's a big ask for Erik ten Hag to sort of try and replicate what's going on. But yeah, a fight with PSV for the Eredivisie seems likely. If we had to say, out of Lyon and Atleti, who do you think is better set to have a better season, if that makes sense? It's a bit of a wishy-washy question, but who is more likely to hold on to their third, maybe challenge for second, if you had to say?
God. The competition's greater in the Spanish league, but in the French league, the real issue there is just that, I don't think Simeone's been amazing the last couple of seasons, but Simeone's still a very good coach. I've no idea how good Silvinho is. He might be dreadful. There's no way of telling.
Yeah, I also think at the top of the French league, again, plagued with inconsistencies in a similar, the chasing pack are plagued with inconsistencies in a similar sense to La Liga. So Villas-Boas hasn't exactly got off to a great start at Marseille, has he? Losing emphatically to sort of Rangers and Accrington Stanley pre-season. They've got to sell big players in order to meet FFP demands. Rudy Garcia, I think, did a really solid job during his tenure at Marseille. And Lille are being picked apart like we discussed before. So, I mean, Paris Saint-Germain are going to win it at Cancer again, aren't they? But I wouldn't, I can see Lyon stretching to second, just in the absence of real consistency, real pedigree, like I said. And Atletico Madrid, I think, will finish third ultimately. So
Fair.
Fine margins, mate.
Well, there you have it. That's our take on Ligue 1 and La Liga mainly, but rebuilds of this summer. Let's move on to quickfire questions. First quickfire question comes in from @Tamish Bahal, regular contributor, sends about 5 questions into my tweet every week. Thank you very much, Tamish. Will Dybala prove to be a bargain at 80 million euros? Chris Hamill, Dybala going to Spurs. What world are we living in?
80 million, yes, is an absolute steal for Dybala. If you can get Dybala for 50 million euros cheaper than Barcelona bought Coutinho, you absolutely execute that deal, don't you? It's weird because he feels somewhat like a Sarri player, and that's not just because he's diminutive. That is because he can kind of play all across that front line. There's an element of like tactical versatility with him. You know, he can be a number of players. He's a bit of a Swiss Army knife in the final third. Didn't score an awful lot of goals this campaign. Did in the Champions League. I mean, the majority of those were against young boys. But still generating 2.1 key passes a game. So he's still a very able creator, even if he's not quite, hitting the back of the net with any great degree of consistency. Of course, the season before had his best goal-scoring season to date. So you got it. The Ronaldo, factor clearly had, left a strong impression on him. But for £80 million, if he really is available for that sum, I can see Spurs, facing an absolute maelstrom of competition for him.
Yeah.
I don't think Spurs get him for that price. Christ. I mean, if you're Liverpool, what an upgrade on Shaqiri he'd be. It's someone that can plug any position in kind of that front five. I don't really have much more to say than do it.
Yeah.
Tottenham, that would be exceptional. I mean, where would he play in that Tottenham midfield? You imagine if they bring someone like Dybala in and Christian Eriksen leaves, right?
Yeah, that's the big ask, I suppose. Well, they can't have Dybala and Christian Eriksen. I mean, you might as well sell Eriksen at that stage. But I just think it's so stupid from Juve. Obviously, Ronaldo's 33. I think Mandzukic is 32, and he's 25, 26. So where's the long-time planning there? I know he didn't have his best campaign last year, but he's still a quality player, comfortably in the top 20 probably in the world, I would say. This move sort of baffles me. Pat, where do you think, if not Spurs, where do you think he'd be best fitting on the continent? I mean, PSG are heavily linked with him, but for me, I just don't want to see him go there.
I'll just be stunned if he goes. It doesn't make sense to me either. Like you look at that front line and there's only one player who can do the Dybala thing, who could do the Insigne or Hazard thing, and it's him. Like there's nobody else in that squad who's capable of doing that. So it doesn't make sense to me unless Juve would have had to have brought in Sarri telling him, no matter whether you want to keep him or not, we are selling Dybala, and I cannot see Sarri accepting that. That makes no sense to me. I mean, Bayern would be an interesting one, but again, it's like Dybala can play off the right, but you don't really want him there. It's not the best place for him. Like,
they'd have to move Thomas Muller on, right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, like Muller. I don't really see how it's an issue to have 2 of those players in your squad. Like, you can have more than one guy. Like, you play a lot of games if you're Bayern Munich. And I don't know, like, he would have been perfect for Atleti. He would have been the perfect Griezmann replacement. He'd have been an upgrade on Griezmann in my view. But I really don't know. Like, it doesn't seem like there's a natural home for him. Like, obviously Chelsea would have been an ideal fit for him. But the problem is he's not really going to defend. And so you've got to figure out how many passengers you can carry. And at the moment, Juve carry 1 passenger when they defend, and that's Ronaldo.
Go to Spurs. It'd be hilarious.
Yeah, it's
Might
hard.
challenge Liverpool for second.
It's really hard to make sense of it, isn't it? I mean, they've got some outstanding other players in that team who you'd still, put on the chopping block before Dybala. Like Bernardeschi, I really, really like him. And is he going to play the Callahan role in Sarri 4-3-3? When Sarri comes in, maybe, doing those hard yards on the right-hand side, big switches of play. You could have Dybala on the left. I know he's predominantly not really played on that side before. And Ronaldo down the centre. Which leaves, Mandzukic. He should be a candidate to leave as opposed to Dybala, but yeah.
It's just not a good price either. It's just mental. Anyway, let's move on to Chris MI 3000's question. With Danny Rose looking to leave Spurs, would it be a good move for Barcelona, to sign him as cover for Jordi Alba, or should another team come in for him? Pat, I know you've been sort of angling for a Danny Rose potential move this summer. Well, not angling for it, but you'd be a fan of his, moving on.
Yeah, I mean, I really like Danny Rose. Danny Rose can do pretty much everything as a defender. Like, he's got good creative numbers, like 1.3 key passes a game, which is the same as Heung-min Son and Dele Alli last season. Like 1.8 dribbles, which actually rose to about 2.5 in the Champions League.
Wow.
Lots of tackles and interceptions, around 4, and he's very rarely beaten by a defender, by an attacker. I really like Danny Rose. Given that one of his reasons for leaving is what he considers to be like the state of kind of racial politics in the UK, it seems like Barcelona would be a weird place for him to go. I think it would make a lot more sense if he were to go to PSG, which he's currently been linked with. So, in the same way that I think it would be odd if he went to Juventus as well for exactly the same reasons. Danny Rose I think he is gonna be, he is 29.
I think he's 29 now, yeah.
And so I think going to a club like PSG or Juve would make more sense in football terms, because they can afford to rest you against the minnows and play you in big European games, where I thought he was excellent at the tail end of last season. I think that would make a lot of sense. He doesn't need to go out and play against Saint-Etienne or Angers or whoever it is, but he can then play in Champions League quarterfinals. I think that PSG will probably make a play for him.
Yeah, I mean their fullback issues sort of rage on. They've obviously lost Dani Alves. They've only got Kurzawa and Juan Bernat at left back, although Bernat plays.
No, they got Guerrero in. They brought Guerrero.
Oh, did they bring Guerrero
and they brought in Abdou Diallo, who of course.
Oh, he can play left back as well.
Diallo,
okay, I stand corrected. Okay, they're doing a bit of work there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be a fan of Danny Rose getting a move even. I don't know why someone like Liverpool's not looking at him.
It doesn't make sense for Barcelona exactly, right? Like because Barcelona, I don't get these short-term moves. Like, if you're Barcelona, go out and find the best young left back you can. Like, they could have gone for Philon Mendy. That would have made perfect sense.
Yeah.
It looks like they won Junior Firpo out of Betis, who looks like a very good young player. He's probably not as developed as Rose is right now, but he's going to be the heir to Alba, and that's what they need to look for, because it doesn't make sense to give another veteran big wages when you're going to have to move them on. Some of Barcelona's squad planning has been so embarrassingly bad, and particularly at left back, you can see that more than almost anywhere else. I think it's been shocking. So they need to start thinking more intelligently in those positions.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think anyone would begrudge Danny Rose a move. He's had a really difficult last sort of 4 or 5 years. I think obviously much talked about his struggles with his mental health, and then a club wanted to check that he wasn't crazy before signing him or something. Just some absolutely outrageous things happening to him. So one final payday if you want Danny Rose, I'd have no issues with it. Chris, are you a Danny Rose guy?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I'm not entirely convinced what more I can add. I think that's a pretty compelling argument from Pat for PSG. I mean, his replacement's going to be interesting. Ryan Sessegnon, who's not really put up tremendously good defensive numbers, rarely featured there for Fulham. But again, you just have to back Pochettino to transform him into a very competent, well-rounded fullback, in the space of 6 months. So let's see if he has, the Poch effect on Sessegnon as well, because it does feel like that is happening.
Yeah. And still got Ben Davies, obviously a very competent left back as well. So that's all we've got time for today. Let's wrap up there. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Chris, what should they go and do now?
Okay, what day is it today? It's Friday. So you should also go and watch We Need to Talk over on Football Daily. You should anticipate the First Extra Time Meets podcast, where me and Pat interview Ted Knutson, the CEO of StatsBomb. He's done a messy project, which is basically an analytical overview of his whole career, statistical overview, I should say, sorry. So pretty exciting stuff, and go and check out Squad Goals.
That's about it. Pat, anything else?
No, I'm good.
Looking forward to that Extra Time Meets podcast. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time. Bye.